What if I told you that beneath the cornfields of Indiana, there are secrets so dark, so terrifying, that even the locals refuse to talk about them after sundown? Would you believe me or not? Well, let's find out, shall we? Let's see how scary this really is. But then write in the comments whether it was terrifying or not so scary after all. Tonight, I won't just be telling stories. We're going to uncover 3 true events that happened in the very heart of America. 3 incidents that were documented, investigated, but never explained. If you enjoy scary stories like these, why not subscribe? Indiana, known as the crossroads of America, a state famous for its peaceful farms, friendly small towns, and quiet way of life. But what most people don't know is that Indiana holds some of the darkest secrets in American history. Secrets whispered in diners, discussed in hushed tones at church gatherings, and passed down from generation to generation like a curse. Before we dive into these stories, I need to warn you, what you're about to hear is not fiction. These aren't fairy tales made up to scare children. Some of the witnesses are still alive. Some of them still can't sleep without the lights on. If you're watching this alone, you might want to turn on a few more lamps. If you're watching at night, I hope you don't get shaken easily. And let me tell you this, if you make it to the end of this video, I'll reveal something that connects all 3 of these Indiana stories together. Something researchers have been trying to explain for decades. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. So settle in, buckle up, get comfortable, and whatever you do, don't take your eyes off the screen. Let's begin, if you're ready. But before we start, if you're new here and you love diving deep into America's most terrifying true stories, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every week we explore the darkest corners of American history, and trust me, you'll want to see what's coming next. Now, let's move on to our first story. In the small town of Thorntown, Indiana, about 40 miles northwest of Indianapolis, there's a road that locals have called Devil's Road for over a century. But the real horror isn't the road itself. The real horror happened in a house that once stood alongside it. A house that no longer exists, a house that burned to ashes in 1923, and yet people still hear the screams. The story begins with the Harrington family. In 1918, as World War I was ending and the Spanish flu was ravaging the nation, Edgar Harrington moved his wife Martha and their 3 children into a farmhouse on what was then known as Miller Road. Edgar had bought the property for almost nothing because the previous owners had vanished in the middle of the night, leaving behind all their belongings, their animals, and no forwarding address. Pretty suspicious, right? Edgar thought he'd found the opportunity of a lifetime. He was wrong. Of course he was. An opportunity like that goes against the natural order of things. The first strange occurrence happened on their very first night in the house. In her diary, which is still held at the Boone County Historical Society, Martha Harrington wrote that she woke up at exactly 3:17 in the morning to find all 3 of her children standing at the foot of her bed. They were holding hands, their eyes were open but completely empty, and they were humming a melody Martha had never heard before. When she called out to them, they didn't respond. When she touched the shoulder of her oldest son, Thomas, the boy collapsed to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. The other 2 children fell the same way. The next morning, they had no memory of the incident. Over the following weeks, things escalated. Objects moved on their own. Locked doors were found wide open, and every night at exactly 3:17, something would wake the family. Sometimes it was footsteps in the attic, sometimes it was scratching sounds in the walls, and sometimes, at its worst, it was a voice. Could you stay in a house like that? A voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A voice speaking in a language that sounded ancient, guttural, almost inhuman. Edgar Harrington, a practical man who had never believed in the supernatural, started sleeping with a loaded shotgun by his bed. But the gun wouldn't help him. Nothing would. In February of 1919, the youngest Harrington child, 5-year-old Elizabeth began drawing pictures, dozens of them, hundreds, all depicting the same thing, a tall, thin figure with no face standing in a doorway. When Martha asked her daughter who the figure was, Elizabeth's answer chilled her to the bone. "That's the man who lives in the basement," Elizabeth said. "He says he's waiting for us." The Harrington house didn't have a basement. At least, that's what they thought. If it were you, would you dare go down into that basement? Edgar spent the next week searching the property, and on March 3, 1919, he found something behind a false wall in the pantry. A door, an old wooden door with strange symbols carved into its surface. Symbols that researchers would later identify as a mixture of Native American pictographs and something else, something that matched no known language or culture. Despite his wife's desperate protests, Edgar opened the door. Behind it was a staircase descending into darkness, a staircase that, according to the original building plans, shouldn't have existed. The house had been built on a concrete foundation. There was no basement, no underground space, but there it was. Edgar descended those stairs with a lantern in one hand and his shotgun in the other. He was gone for 4 hours. When he came back up, his hair had turned completely white. The lantern was gone, the shotgun was gone, and Edgar Harrington never spoke again. Not a single word for the rest of his life. Doctors examined him and found nothing physically wrong. His vocal cords were intact, his brain showed no signs of damage. He simply chose not to speak. Or maybe he couldn't. Maybe whatever he saw down there had taken his voice along with something else, something deeper. Martha decided to leave immediately. But this is where the story reaches its darkest point. What do you think happened? Also, don't forget to subscribe. They couldn't leave. Every time the family tried to get away from the property, they found themselves back at the house. They would drive for miles down Miller Road, watching the house disappear in the rearview mirror, only to turn a corner and find themselves pulling into their own driveway. They tried walking. They tried leaving at different times of day. They even asked friends to drive them away. Nothing worked. The house wouldn't let them go. For 4 years, the Harrington family lived as prisoners in that house. Martha's diary entries from this period are almost unbearable to read. She describes watching her children grow pale and weak. She describes her husband sitting for hours, staring at the door in the pantry, his lips moving silently as if talking to something only he could see. She describes the sounds coming from below, sounds of movement, of breathing, of something massive stirring in the darkness. And she describes the visits. Every night, at exactly 3:17, the faceless figure from Elizabeth's drawings would appear. It would stand in the doorway of each family member's room, one by one, never entering, just watching, waiting, as if counting down to something. The end came on October 31st, 1923, Halloween night. A local farmer named Harold Jensen was passing the Harrington property when he saw flames rising from the house. He ran to help, but when he arrived, he found something that would haunt him until his death in 1978. The house was engulfed in flames. Fire was shooting from every window, every door. The heat was so intense that Jensen couldn't get within 50 feet of the structure. But through the flames, in an upstairs window, he saw the Harrington family, all 5 of them, standing completely still, holding hands, looking at him. They weren't screaming, they weren't trying to escape, they were smiling. And behind them, towering over them, stood a tall, thin figure with no face. The house burned to ashes. No bodies were ever found, not a single bone, not a single tooth. The fire chief's report, still on file in the county records, notes it as unexplainable given the intensity of the fire and the confirmed presence of the family just minutes before the roof collapsed. But here's the part that still terrifies locals to this day. The next morning, when investigators searched through the ashes, they found the basement door completely intact, unburned, unmarked, standing upright in the middle of the debris as if it had been placed there deliberately. When they opened it, they found only dirt, packed solid earth, no staircase, no basement, nothing. The door was taken as evidence and stored at the Boone County Sheriff's Office. 3 weeks later, it disappeared. No one knows how, no one knows where it went. But people say that if you drive down Devil's Road at 3:17 in the morning and look in your rearview mirror, you can see the silhouette of a house that's no longer there. A house with flames dancing in its windows. A house with 5 figures inside, holding hands and smiling. And behind them, something tall and thin and faceless, watching you drive away. But are you really driving away? Or are you just going in circles, getting closer and closer to where the house once stood, where the door might still be waiting, where something ancient and patient sits in a darkness that never ends? Some questions are better left unanswered. Some doors should never be opened, and some roads in Indiana were never meant to be traveled at all. Take a breath. That was only the first story, and if you thought that was disturbing, you're not ready for what's coming next. Our second story takes us to Gary, Indiana, a place once called the City of the Century, a place left to decay and abandonment, a place where something walks the empty streets at night, searching for anyone foolish enough to still be outside after dark. But before we go to Gary, let me ask you something. Are you still watching? Are the lights still on? Good. Keep them on. You're going to need them. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe and leave a like. Now we're moving on to another terrifying tale. Are you curious? Then let's continue. Welcome back to the second scary story, all you horror lovers. Before we continue, I want to take a minute. If you're still here, still watching, that tells me something about you. You're not someone who scares easily. You're someone who wants to know the truth no matter how dark it gets. And I respect that. So do me a favor, leave a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. I read every comment, and I love connecting with people who share this passion for the unknown. Plus, it helps me know what kind of stories you want next. Okay, let's continue. Thank you. And if you've subscribed and liked, we're starting our new scary story right now. Gary, Indiana. If you've never been, you probably know it from one thing only, the birthplace of Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5. But Gary isn't known for that anymore. Today, Gary is one of the most abandoned cities in America. Entire neighborhoods stand empty. Factories that once employed thousands are now rusted skeletons. Schools, churches, hospitals, all abandoned, all left to decay. But something still lives in Gary, something that has been seen by hundreds of witnesses over the past 40 years, something the locals call the Shadow Walker. The first documented sighting occurred in 1981. A woman named Denise Washington was driving home from her night shift at the steel mill. It was around 2:30 in the morning, and she was taking her usual route through the abandoned industrial district. She had driven this road hundreds of times. She knew every pothole, every broken streetlight, every collapsed building. But this night, she saw something new. In the middle of the road, illuminated by her headlights, stood a figure. At first, Denise thought it was a person, maybe someone homeless, maybe someone stranded and in need of help. She slowed her car and rolled down her window to call out. That's when she realized something was very, very wrong. The figure was tall, at least 7 feet, maybe more. It was completely black, not dark-skinned, not wearing black clothes, actually black, like someone had cut a hole in reality and she was looking at the absence of light. It had no features, no face, no clothing, just an indistinct humanoid shape made of pure darkness. And it was walking toward her car. Denise floored the accelerator. Her car lurched toward the figure. She was too scared to swerve, too panicked to think clearly. She braced for impact. But there was no impact. Her car passed through it as if it were made of smoke. But as she passed through it, Denise felt something. A cold so intense it burned, a pressure in her chest like something was trying to squeeze her heart, and a voice, not heard with her ears, but felt inside her skull, speaking 3 words. "I see you." Denise didn't stop driving until she reached the police station. She was hysterical, barely able to speak. The officers who took her statement noted that her car's temperature gauge showed the interior at 12 degrees below zero in the middle of July. They also noted that Denise's hair, which had been black when she left for work that evening, now had a streak of pure white in it. The report was dismissed as a hallucination brought on by fatigue or stress. The file was filed and forgotten. But it shouldn't have been forgotten, because Denise Washington wasn't the last person to see the shadow walker. She was just the first to survive. Over the next decade, shadow walker sightings increased. Always at night, always in the abandoned sections of Gary, always the same description, a tall, faceless figure made of living darkness. People reported seeing it standing in empty windows, passing through walls, rising from the ground like smoke from a fire. And then people started disappearing. In 1985, a group of 4 teenagers decided to explore an abandoned steel mill on Gary's east side. They had heard the stories about the shadow walker but didn't believe them. They thought it would be fun to spend the night in the factory, maybe catch a ghost on camera, maybe just drink some beers and tell scary stories. 3 of them came back. The 4th, 17-year-old Marcus Johnson, was never seen again. His friends told police they had split up to explore different parts of the factory. They heard Marcus scream once, a short, sharp cry that cut off almost instantly. When they ran to find him, all they found was his flashlight, still on, lying in the middle of an empty room. And on the wall above it, written in something that looked like ash but couldn't be wiped away, were 3 words. "He is mine now." Police searched the factory for weeks. They brought in dogs. They brought in thermal imaging equipment. They found nothing. Marcus Johnson's disappearance remains unsolved to this day. But Marcus wasn't alone. Between 1985 and 2005, at least 12 people vanished from the abandoned sections of Gary, Indiana. All at night, all without a trace. All in areas where the shadow walker had been seen. The most disturbing case was the Rivera family in 1993. Carlos and Maria Rivera lived on the edge of one of Gary's abandoned neighborhoods. They had stayed even as their neighbors left, even as the houses around them fell into ruin, even as the streetlights stopped working and the police stopped patrolling. They had nowhere else to go. This was their home. They had raised their 3 children here. They weren't going to be driven out by economic collapse or urban decay. But they should have been driven out by fear. On the night of September 14, 1993, a neighbor named Harold Freeman was walking his dog past the Rivera house. It was just after midnight, and Harold suffered from insomnia. He would often walk the empty streets at night, finding a strange peace in the silence and solitude. As he passed the Rivera house, Harold noticed that every light in the home was on, every single one. This was unusual. The Riveras were careful about their electric bill and usually kept the house dark after 10. Don't forget to subscribe for this story. Harold noticed something else. Every window of the house was filled with the same thing, a dark figure, standing completely still, looking out. Harold counted 7 windows, 7 figures, but the Rivera family only had 5 members. Harold ran home and called the police. When officers arrived, the lights in the Rivera house were off. The officers knocked on the door. No answer. They announced themselves and entered. The house was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of everything. Every piece of furniture was gone, every photograph, every dish, every book, every article of clothing. The house had been completely emptied, as if no one had ever lived there. The only things remaining were the light fixtures, still warm to the touch, and something written on the living room wall. "They walk with me now." The Riveras were never found. Their car was still in the driveway. Their bank accounts were never touched. No family member ever heard from them again. 5 people, 2 of them children under 10, simply ceased to exist. Isn't that so strange? The investigation went nowhere. How do you investigate something like that? How do you explain a family that vanishes from a locked house, taking all their possessions with them, but leaving their vehicle behind? How do you explain the figures in the windows, 7 figures in a place where only 5 people lived? You can't. You file the report, you close the case, and you try not to think about it when you're lying in bed late at night and you hear something moving outside your window. But the shadow walker wasn't done with Gary. It was just getting started. In 2003, an urban explorer named David Chen came to Gary specifically to document abandoned buildings. David was experienced. He had explored abandoned sites across America and even Europe. He had seen things that would disturb most people. He thought he was ready for anything. He wasn't ready for Gary. David spent 3 days in the city, photographing abandoned schools, factories, and homes. On the 3rd night, he decided to explore an abandoned church on the south side. The church had once been beautiful, with stained glass windows, vaulted ceilings, and ornate woodwork. Now it was a shell, its windows shattered, its pews rotted, its altar covered in graffiti. David set up his camera on a tripod and began taking long exposure photographs. The technique required him to stand motionless for several minutes while the camera captured the available light. During one of these exposures, David saw it. At the far end of the church, where the altar had been, a shadow began to rise from the floor. Not a shadow cast by something. David's flashlight was behind him. A shadow with its own form, its own substance. It rose slowly, like smoke, coalescing into a human shape. A shape at least 8 feet tall. A shape with no face, no features, just a silhouette of pure darkness. And it was moving toward him. David tried to run, but his legs wouldn't work. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. All he could do was stand there, paralyzed, watching as the shadow walker crossed the church. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if it had all the time in the world, as if it knew David couldn't escape. When it was 10 feet away, David finally found his voice. He screamed a single word, "Please." The shadow walker stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. David could feel the cold radiating from the figure, could feel that terrible pressure in his chest, could hear that voice inside his head, not speaking words this time, but laughing. A low, rumbling laugh that seemed to come from very far away and very long ago. Then the shadow walker spoke, not in his head this time, but out loud. A voice that sounded like stone grinding, like ice cracking, like something that shouldn't exist, forcing itself to form human words. "Not yet," it said, "but soon." And then it was gone. It didn't fade, didn't walk away. It was just gone. One moment it was there, the next, David was alone in the church with nothing but his flashlight and the sound of his own ragged breathing. David ran. He didn't stop to get his camera. He didn't stop to get his bag. He ran from the church, ran to his car, and drove away from Gary, Indiana as fast as his vehicle could take him. But here's what makes David Chen's experience different from the others. He had caught it on camera. When David finally stopped running, when he calmed down enough to think clearly, he realized his camera had been recording the entire time. The long exposure had captured everything. The photograph is still available online if you know where to look. It shows the interior of the abandoned church illuminated by David's flashlight, and at the altar, towering over the ruined pews, stands a figure of absolute darkness, a figure with no face, a figure that seems to absorb the light around it rather than reflect it. Skeptics have analyzed the image. They've looked for signs of manipulation, evidence of double exposure, any explanation that doesn't involve something supernatural. They found nothing. The photograph is authentic. Whatever David Chen captured that night was really there. If this story interests you, don't forget to like and subscribe. David never returned to Gary. He never did urban exploration again. In interviews years later, he said that when the shadow walker spoke to him, it left something behind, a feeling, a certainty, a knowledge that someday, when he least expected it, it would come for him. Not yet, it had said, but soon. David Chen died in his sleep in 2019. He was 42 years old. The cause of death was never determined. His heart stopped at 2:30 in the morning, the same time Denise Washington had her first encounter with the shadow walker 38 years earlier. His family found him in bed, his eyes open, his face frozen in an expression of absolute terror. And on the wall above his bed, written in something that looked like ash but couldn't be wiped away, were 3 words: "He is mine now." The shadow walker is still out there, still walking the empty streets of Gary, Indiana, still waiting in abandoned buildings, still watching from broken windows. If you ever find yourself in Gary at night, which I strongly recommend you never do, keep your eyes fixed forward. Don't look into the shadows. Don't stop your car. And whatever you do, don't go into the abandoned buildings. Because once the shadow walker sees you, it never forgets. And sooner or later, not yet becomes now. 2 stories down, 1 to go, and I saved the worst for last. Our final story doesn't take place in an abandoned house or an empty city. It takes place somewhere you should feel safe, somewhere hundreds of people gather every day, somewhere children play and families celebrate. It takes place in a hospital where something went very, very wrong in the summer of 1977. A hospital where, for reasons that were never explained, an entire floor of patients vanished in a single night. This is the story of the Indianapolis Memorial Massacre, a story that was covered up by local authorities, a story that was erased from official records, a story I'm about to tell you for the first time in over 40 years. Stay with me. We're almost at the end. And remember what I said at the beginning of this video. There's something that connects these 3 stories together, something researchers have been trying to explain for decades. You're about to find out what it is. Are you very curious? Then be patient a little longer. Now, subscribe to this channel and like the video. We're moving on to the final and most terrifying story. Welcome to the final part, the most terrifying one. How were the stories up until now? Did they scare you? Listen to this story too, because the real horror is coming now. But first, like and subscribe. Let's begin. 1977. The United States had just celebrated its 200th anniversary. Disco music was playing everywhere. People were looking to the future with hope. But at Memorial Hospital in Indianapolis, what happened that summer night was far from hopeful. Memorial Hospital had opened in 1919. For 60 years, it had served as one of Indianapolis's most trusted healthcare institutions. It was a massive 5-story, 300-bed building. Every day, hundreds of patients received treatment, and dozens of babies were born. But the 4th floor of the hospital was different. The fourth floor was reserved for patients requiring long-term care, those in comas, those who were paralyzed, patients who couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't communicate with the outside world. People forgotten by their families, lost in the system. Some had been lying in those beds for over a decade. On June 17th, there were 32 patients on the fourth floor. 8 nurses and 2 doctors were working the night shift. When the clock struck 11 at night, everything was normal. Nurses were doing their routine checks, doctors were writing their reports, patients were lying quietly in their beds. At 10 minutes past midnight, the hospital's security guard, Arthur Simmons, heard strange sounds coming from the fourth floor. It started like a hum at first, then it grew louder, a high-pitched, disturbing frequency. Simmons tried to reach the fourth floor by radio. No response came. He took the elevator to the fourth floor. When the doors opened, he saw that the corridor was completely dark. All the lights were out. He pulled out his flashlight and began to move forward. When he looked in the first room, the bed was empty. Second room, empty. Third room, empty. Simmons quickened his pace, checking room by room. They were all empty. 32 patients, 8 nurses, 2 doctors, a total of 42 people, all gone. But the beds weren't disturbed. It was as if the patients had gotten up slowly, calmly. There were no signs of struggle, no signs of escape. People had seemingly evaporated. Isn't that so strange? When Simmons reached the nurses' station at the end of the corridor, he found only one thing: the shift log. The last entry had been made 3 minutes before midnight. In Nurse Linda Cooper's handwriting, it read, "The patients are waking up, all of them at the same time. Their eyes are open, but no one is speaking. They're walking into the corridor. They're walking toward the elevator. No, not the elevator, toward the wall next to the elevator. There's something on the wall. A door? It wasn't there before. The door is opening. Inside is dark, so dark. The patients are going in. Dr. Morrison is going too. The nurses as well. I have to go too. Its voice is so beautiful, so peaceful. I have to go." The entry ended there. Simmons ran to the wall next to the elevator. It was a flat, empty wall. There was no door, no opening of any kind, just 10 years of hospital paint and cracks. Police were there within an hour. The FBI got involved the next day. The investigation lasted weeks. The entire hospital was searched thoroughly. Underground tunnels were checked. The roof was examined. Nothing was found. What do you think could have happened here? Write your thoughts in the comments and let's discuss. 42 people had vanished from a locked hospital floor without being caught on security cameras, without leaving a single trace. The authorities decided to cover up the incident. Families were told that patients had been transferred to different facilities. No statement was made to the press. The fourth floor was permanently closed. The hospital was demolished in 1997, and a shopping center was built in its place. But the story didn't end there. In 2014, Arthur Simmons died at 83 years old. Before his death, he recorded a long confession on video for his grandson. In that recording, he described what he saw that night, things he didn't tell the police or the FBI. Simmons said that when he first went up to the fourth floor, he saw a figure at the end of the corridor. A tall, thin, faceless figure. A figure that looked like it was made of darkness. The figure looked at him. Even though it had no eyes, he felt it looking. And then it walked through the door in the wall. The door closed behind it and disappeared. Simmons also said something else. He said that night, when the elevator doors opened, he would never forget the smell of the fourth floor. A mixture of sulfur and rotting flowers, and a sound coming from very deep, very far away. A humming. The the sound of hundreds of voices humming the same melody at the same time. The same melody the Harrington children had been humming that night. And this brings us to the real question. What connects these three stories together? The Harrington house in Thorntown, the Shadow Walker in Gary, Memorial Hospital in Indianapolis. 3 different places, 3 different times, but there are things they all have in common. A faceless figure made of darkness, doors that don't exist, unexplained disappearances, and writing that looks like ash but can't be wiped away. Researchers have been studying this connection for years. Some think it has to do with underground rivers running beneath Indiana. Some talk about Native American curses. Some speak of interdimensional gateways. No one knows for certain. But here's what we do know. In Indiana, in the very heart of America, there is something we cannot explain. Something that walks at night, something that comes to take people. And perhaps the scariest part is that it's still there. So the next time you're passing through Indiana, make sure you cross the border before the sun sets. Don't go into abandoned buildings. Don't stop on dark roads. And if you open your eyes at midnight and see something tall, thin, and faceless standing in the corner of your room, don't move. Don't breathe. And whatever you do, never, ever close your eyes. Because when you close your eyes, it can take you, and no one knows where it takes them. If this video gave you chills, hit that like button and tell me in the comments which story scared you the most. And if you want more scary stories, subscribe right now. Every week we explore the darkest secrets of America. See you in the next video. Keep the lights on. Take good care of yourselves. Goodbye.